forest. This plantation became an actual property in 1694. 1,600 acres that was gifted by the King of England at the time. That family had it for about 20 years, sold it off. It changed hands a few times, and then in 1850 the Porsche family purchased this property, all 1,600 acres, and they still own it today. That family has split into many branches of the family tree, but the Porsches are still the name that most people know about this. Porsche Bluff is the road that runs next to Walmart, goes down, but like where Walmart is and the shopping center, see how they own all of them. It's all there. All those companies have to pay them to be on their property. The slaves, so something I didn't know, when you had slaves on plantations in the South, I always assumed that when you purchased a person, that person was yours. So wherever you went for the rest of your life, that person would be yours, and that's just not how it was most of the time here. Most of the time, and especially specifically on this plantation, as it changed ownership, the families stayed on the property. They were purchased along with the land. There were 5 families at one point in time, or even up to 129 of them working the property. There is a little bit of a slave graveyard that is behind you. You can see a few of the graves. A lot of them were unmarked, and a lot of them were down on the ground. And then Hurricane Hugo in 1989 did clear a bunch of them out as well. So that's what's remaining. The ancestors that still live around here will come and visit. The ones that don't live around here still come occasionally to come and pay their respects as they go along. In 1951, after the Porsche family bought the property, I don't know if it was clairvoyance or knowing what was happening in the world at the time. I have no idea why, but they decided to give each slave family 3 acres of their own with a little house on it. There was one family in particular, Cain Bryant was the gentleman's name, who planted these oak trees. His ancestors, he was no longer with us, with them, but his ancestors were gifted 20 acres. They still have that property. That's actually currently where Park West Rec Center is. They rent that on 10-year leases to the city. The others, I know that 2 of them still own their property, but we do believe the other 2 sold, and it's now developments. So 1740 is when these oak trees got planted by that family. All of these oaks that go all the way down. There's a couple out by the big house that you can see the back side of from here. Better up there, you'll see those 2. He planted every one of those trees. Minus one oak tree, it got hit by lightning in the mid-80s, and they replanted. But because these are all so sustained, the root systems are so good, it's probably not going to make it. It struggles. We constantly have to do stuff to it, but I don't think it's going to make it. Do we have any questions so far? Yes, ma'am. Young lady. No? Just raise your hand. Okay, sir.
How are you spelling Porsche?
P-O-R-C-H-E.
Oh, okay.
That's how they spell Porsche. There's actually an R at the end of it. There's an R at the end of it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Porcher? Yeah, we'll go with that. And the family doesn't live here on the property. They own the KOA that you're on now. But they don't live here on the property. There's one living relative who's 6th generation. His brother is the person who runs the shade would be all right now. Not super hot. So these are the structures. The very first was the big house. That's the back side of it, but that was built in 1741. Second building that was built in 1742 was the kitchen house. Back then, it was separate from the main dwelling. In case of fire, everything was fire, so that's why there's a separation. If you had the means, you had a second complete building. For those like my ancestors who didn't, you probably just had a little fireplace on the outside of the property, so you could do your stuff there. But that's the kitchen house. There is that giant oak tree that's right there, right behind there. There's a little brick shack that's right in front of that. It looks just like the one that's on this side, except it doesn't have the brick showing as much. That was actually a smokehouse, so that's where they would smoke and cure meats to keep longer prior to refrigeration. And then this one actually was a dairy house, so that's where they would try and keep milk from spoiling and going bad in the summer months and keep it in there, keep it cool for a little while. You know that the Porcher family did try and turn it into an ice house in the late 1800s. But that brick is not really the best thing to keep cold, so I know that was a very short-lived experience and didn't work out for them. And then up here you have the carriage house. That's just where the carriages were kept when not in use or when being repaired. And as we said before, the horses in the horse stable would have all been back. Now they have female and baby cows. So this is the whole property. The most unique thing about this to me is during the Revolutionary War, the King of England said burn Charlestown to the ground, specifically wanted to burn the plantations in Charleston. And the reason for that is there was a lot of trade and commerce, and they were helping to feed the war, so to speak, against England. So they went plantation to plantation and burned the houses to the ground, set the fields on fire, and killed anybody who tried to stop them from doing that. And they got Magnolia Plantation and then Boone Hall. They actually got 21 plantations on east of the Cooper, and the family heard about it. The Porcher family heard about it, and they left. Actually, it was the family before. I'm sorry. They left. They went inland to a cousin's. And when they left, the slave families that worked this property moved into this house. I don't know if they were aware of what was going on, or if it was just like, hey, people left. We're going to take over. This is a nicer house. We're going in here. And nobody knows exactly why, because nothing's been written about it that they can say. But when the colonel came here to burn this plantation to the ground, the families that were in the house begged them not to, saying that they had nowhere else to go. And for some reason, they did not burn this house to the ground. So this is actually the only freestanding one that was never rebuilt. The family comes back from inland and finds that their house isn't burnt down, and they're like, whoa, our house, thank you for saving it. Your houses are out there. And so that's how this is the only one east of the Cooper River that was never rebuilt from that. Now I can tell you that over the years, building materials obviously wear down after time, so they have, in fact, this ride was closed for a year, a little over a year, as they redid the roof and the siding on the big house. But in 1972, this property became a historical foundation. As soon as that happened, rules and regulations dictated that they couldn't make changes. So you have to go with the closest colors that have to be approved first, and you have to go with the closest building supplies. Now the original house lasted for more than 200 years before it had to have major replacements, and now about every 20, 25 years, they have to do a whole bunch of replacements. So we can see how building materials have changed dramatically over a couple hundred years. But that's their favorite, my favorite part of that. Then there's their favorite story, which is on the wall inside. This is kind of a history museum for them now. And there's a framed thing, it's a memoir that one of the women kept during the Civil War. And the doors were wide open. It was a hot summer day, and so the windows and doors are all open, and they're about to have dinner. Dinner's on the table. The family's getting together to come down, and all of a sudden, a man on horseback, a Union soldier from the War of Northern Aggression, comes rushing through the back door and stabs the pheasant that was for dinner that night with his sword, rides out the front down the way, and just took their pheasant for dinner. And she was extremely distraught. The writing is very clear how much it really bothered her that a man could dare ride a horse into her house and steal their dinner, and her children would be hungry. And it's really an interesting story. Just 2 pages, but beautifully written too. The handwriting is phenomenal. Perfect cursive. There is only one other thing, and it's nothing to see. But 9 years ago, when their grandfather died, those who are still owning and running the property, up to that point, the entire Porsche family had been buried at Christ Church on 17. They kind of helped get that church together and build it to what it was. But Grandpa decided that he wanted to be buried on this property that had given them so much. So there's a gate, and there's a private graveyard that's just in those woods that I've never seen because it's very private. The family does not let anyone near there. Any questions?
Are there still furnishings inside?
There are, but not original from the house. So part of the historical foundation requires that you don't change anything about the property. In fact, actually all the woods and structures that you see, even a large part of the nature trail on the KOA is designated that can never be built on, can never change. So including the exterior of these houses. But the interiors, they're really wide open about. You do not have to keep everything historical. So this is actually now completely changed out so that all their great-great-grandchildren of the current grandfather, patriarch, can be married on the property and have little gatherings in the house. There's a bar on one side, an updated kitchen. These do have electricity now, still no air conditioning, but they do have ceiling fans to try and keep it a little bit cooler. They still have a working kitchen from 1742 in that house that's still there, but they've added on into this one a little stove and some things so that when you're entertaining, but it's just for family. They keep it very, very private. Just imagine that you're sitting on the front porch with a glass of non-iced tea because they didn't have ice, and look out that way and see nothing at all but rows and rows of fields. That's what all of that was, just rows and rows of fields. Cotton was the main source of income, but they also farmed and green beans and corn and tomatoes and strawberries and everything that we grow here really, really well in our 2 growing seasons here in the south. They did. It wasn't until the late 60s that they got the permission to build the 2 man-made lakes. This one's actually about 3 times the size of the one y'all have at the KOA, and they are not connected. There's actually complete land in between them. And then in 72 they got the historical foundation. Then the historical foundation didn't want them to dig the lakes, so it was a 10-year court battle. And they won because they had already had it in the planning and had already gone through planning, so they got to dig them out anyway. They're very, very deep, and they were going to have to bring water in from the upstate to fill them, but then Hugo came and filled them for them. So this actually was, both were saltwater lakes first, and then brackish water for a while, and now they are 100% freshwater lakes, as long as we don't have another giant hurricane come push a whole bunch of saltwater in the area. So a whole bunch of great fishing, but all of the Low Country's famous animals are all here, every one of them. So right now it is just getting towards summer, the beginning of summer. I've already seen several. Be careful. Right now cottonmouths are the snakes that you need to worry about. They are also known as moccasins, black moccasins. They are water-dwelling snakes, so they're going to be in the water or very near the water. They don't really go out of that. They aren't going to come after you. They're not going to try and bite you on purpose. But just if you decide that you want to get down close to the water for any reason whatsoever, just make sure that you pay very close attention to what's around you, because if you accidentally step on one, they absolutely will bite you. We also have alligators. Right now there's a mama and a 3.5-foot baby that we are aware of. We've seen the baby on the KOA side, but we haven't seen mama, so we don't know if she's just over here. Fox, brown and black bear. We do have some bobcats, but I haven't seen them a lot. More coyotes than them. And there are some wolves, but that's also not very popular here as well. And then we also have brown and black widow spiders. Those are actually having their eggs right now, so be cautious of those. Won't kill an adult, but small child, especially if they fall into a hatched nest, could have trouble.
Watch it,
Could have to be rushed to the hospital. This part, everybody likes to hear about the most famous thing that's been shot here, which is the movie The Notebook. Everybody's heard of that one predominantly, especially the women. My wife made me watch it twice. I didn't want to watch it the second time. It was way too sad for me, but she made me watch it the second time. All of your scenes coming in to the back of the house are from that movie, and then all of your lake scenes are from that movie. And the most interesting story about that is something that I learned when I started doing this. Shay Jr., who is my boss, was about 6 or 7 years old when they were filming that movie here, and he told me a cool story. There is a guy who his job is to get birds to follow him instead of their mothers from a very, very young chick age. All sorts of birds too, ducks and geese and chickens, and just get them to follow him instead. And so in all of those shots and scenes where they're rowing the boat and the birds are just following along, because on the other side of the boat is that guy, and he's swimming along outside of the shot. He's swimming along the boat on the other side. So somebody figured out a way to make a living in Hollywood by doing that. And I think that's just the most crazy thing I've ever heard. So I like that story.
Bird whisperer.
And there is one last thing that I'll talk about before I answer any questions, and that is, unfortunately, you don't really get to see them anyway. Sometimes people can see like tiny bits of etching, but I don't want you guys to get soaked. The windows are original. Everything except 4 panes of glass is original from 1741. What's unique about that is after the Porsche family bought it, they wanted to have the house blessed. And in doing that, when they had their pastor come over to bless the house, he took his ring and he etched a small, short Bible phrase. It's getting longer stuff. And in one of the panes, that's one of the panes that's missing actually. That one's in the Natural History Museum in Columbia. And then the other 3 were lost by children, just being rough with them or whatever. But anyway, the glass is really thick. And so every time they have to redo the windows, they take each one out. But after that happened, every single time that they would have big functions, they'd have parties, they'd have people come from afar, or dignitaries come, the women would often sign their names and date on a piece of the glass. So like a whole lot of that glass, up and down on this side of the house only, has etchings of people's names and dates all the way from 1851 all the way to like 1926, I think was the last one that I could read. Some of them you can't read very well, but I just thought that was really interesting that they've got that kind of history saved on the front of the house. Hugo didn't do anything to hurt the house either, so pushed all the water in, but didn't hurt the house. Do we have any questions? No.
Was that the kitchen up there? Is that a house? Was that added on later, or?
Yeah, in the late 60s, their great grandfather wanted to have an office, but he didn't want to change the house, so he added on this little tiny part. It's actually the apartment that Kurt lives in now, so they've changed that twice. And when Kurt moved in, I think they had to pay a pretty steep fine, but he wanted a pool, so they added a small. It's a really small pool, big enough for like 6-7 people, but they put a little pool behind there too. So that is an add-on that's not original to the house.
This is pretty.